What an honor it is to be here. I'm not a speaker, and this is my first sermon, so please be gentle. I'm pleased to see at least 5 of my current Ground Zero cohorts here, and I'm sure they're giving me some support. It's 11 o'clock. I'd like to start with a reading from the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 4. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And today is Armistice Day, 2018, the 100th anniversary, mark the time, of the 11th hour, of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the end of the war to end all wars. 17 million souls were lost in that war. Over half of them were non-combatants. The United States lost 116,000 soldiers. Over a third of those young men died of the flu. A generation later, World War II took 80 million souls. Over 2/3 of those were non-combatants, and 420,000 Americans died. 2.5 million souls were lost in the Korean War, including 36,000 Americans. A generation later, another 2.5 million souls were lost in Vietnam, including 58,000 Americans. That war dragged on for nearly 20 years. Adding up the carnage, over 100 million souls were lost in the 4 major wars that the United States fought in the 20th century. 630,000 American servicemen died. Less than 3,000 American non-combatants died. Most of those were people who were interned in Europe and Asia during World War II. Fewer than 100 civilians died on U.S. soil. Most of those at Pearl Harbor. The numbers tell the story. The impact of those wars on life in America was minuscule compared to Europe and East Asia. We don't get it. We are indeed fortunate to be protected by 2 oceans. I can't imagine the horror of living in war. I think that our nation's cavalier attitude toward war is a direct result of the fact that we haven't had a war fought on our own soil. We are simply very lucky to live where we live. Back to the Vietnam War. An interesting thing happened in the early 70s. In the face of overwhelming opposition to the war at home, Congress placed selective service on hold. Richard Nixon believed that opposition to the war would end if the draft was ended. Or put another way, young men would stop protesting wars if they didn't have to go and fight in them. Imagine that. So since 1973, our country has relied on a professional military to fight our wars. And the seeds of the militarism we are seeing today were sowed in the late 70s. Military pay scales were raised to provide a living wage for our servicemen, and retaining talented people in the military became a high priority. The result was a steady drumbeat from our government during both Republican and Democratic administrations that our military must be kept in a constant state of readiness to fight wars throughout the world. That's where we are now. And this is what militarism looks like. Our elected leaders use military power to expand our national interests and our values abroad. Diplomacy and statesmanship have been set aside in favor of military posturing. Our government glorifies the military, and we're expected to stand on the sidewalk and cheer. I'm glad we didn't have to do that today with the military parade. How ridiculous. The military budget for 2018 was over $700 billion. Include another additional $150 billion for nuclear weapons, the Veterans Administration, and other hidden military funding. The U.S. spends more on war making than the next 9 countries put together. Which brings us to the question for today. Why would any nation spend all those resources on a military and never use it? The war in Afghanistan has persisted for 18 years. Does anyone believe that the blood and treasure we are spilling there is making us safer as a nation? Our military is being used in places and situations that were unthinkable before the all-volunteer service. Why? Because the young men and women that we send to fight and die are bought and paid for. Why wouldn't we use them? And who's doing the fighting? Today, the military concentrates its recruiting on young men and women with poor prospects for employment, rural youth, people of color, high school graduates who can't afford college. The top recruiting district today is Puerto Rico, with a 40% unemployment rate. The military uses Spanish language advertising to recruit Hispanic youth. These are the young men and women who are dying in our name. I was drafted in 1966, along with thousands of other 19 and 20-year-old college dropouts. I can see all the gray heads nodding, so yeah, right, I remember that. Our destination was the war in Vietnam. I would never have volunteered to enter the military if I wasn't drafted. I decided to enlist in the Navy for 4 years to avoid 2 years in the Army. And that was a decision that changed the course of my life. It turned out I was very good at it, at what I was assigned to do, and I liked it. The Navy helped me to finish college. They gave me a commission. I had a successful 32-year career as a submarine officer. None of that would have happened without a draft. Hey, you see where I'm heading here. We're in what I call an age of continuous war. The challenge, then, for those with a moral compass, is to navigate out of this storm and find a way to peace for ourselves and for our children. I think Nixon actually had it right. If we want to end the age of continuous war, then we have to send young people who are more like you and me off to fight. Educated, middle-class white people wouldn't stand for it. They take to the streets. Is there a solution? The military-industrial complex that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about is firmly entrenched in our government. We need to fundamentally change our government. Nevertheless, I would like to propose a policy of mandatory national service. 2 years, which may include the military, but could also include peaceful alternatives. Of course, there will be those who find ways to avoid service, but that's not the point. The point is that service benefits both the nation and the individual citizens who serve. It makes better citizens. Many of us remember President John Kennedy's inaugural call to service. Quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." End quote. We need to draw down our oversized military. Between 2008 and 2016, the Obama administration reduced the size of the military to its lowest level since prior to World War II. The current administration has reversed the trend, authorizing a significant buildup in both personnel and arms. Trump's military buildup is estimated to add 60,000 servicemen and women and increase the defense budget by nearly $700 billion over the next 10 years. We are chasing a national security strategy that commits our military to more and more missions. We need to reduce what we expect our capabilities to be, not expand them. We can't ask the military to do more with less. Rather, we should strive to do less with less. By comparison, Russia's 2017 defense budget was $65 billion, less than a tenth of ours. And China's was about $200 billion. The United States spends over 3 times more on defense than the 28 European Union member states combined. Our founding fathers envisioned an army of citizen soldiers to fight the wars that needed to be fought. That's what the Second Amendment is all about. A smaller standing army, standing military, that has a significant number of conscripts restores that vision. This was our nation's approach to military readiness up until the Cold War. And we did pretty well. We need a core military that is professional and offers a meaningful career path for service members, but the size of that professional element can be reduced substantially. Maintain a real reserve component that can be mobilized, if God forbid it needs to be, and encourage conscripts to remain in the reserve after their active service. Stop glorifying the military and stop glorifying the war machine. Cancel seafair. Yes. Disband the Blue Angels. shift from a war economy to a peace economy. We live in a military community here in Kitsap. Imagine the opportunities for economic growth in our community when nuclear weapons are finally abolished. Imagine all the bright, energetic young men and women who will convert their skills to peaceful careers. Imagine what a great technological campus could be created at the former Bangor Submarine Base. Imagine. And lastly, we need to elect leaders with the wisdom and moral courage to avoid conflicts abroad. Elect leaders who would think of our young men and women in uniform like their own sons and daughters. Would they send their son or daughter off to fight and possibly die in a particular conflict? Well, if the answer is no, then they shouldn't send someone else's son or daughter either. And we shouldn't let them. Imagine. Thank you, and peace be with you.